Today, I'm going to tell you a story about a woman who once buried her dream of motherhood beneath the deep snows of a Wyoming winter, and a man who had never known love because his heart had long frozen over with guilt. They weren't searching for romance, just one thing, a seed, an heir. But the land doesn't bloom easily, and sometimes what gets planted isn't in the belly of a woman, but in the heart of a man. This isn't a sweet love story. It's about choices, redemption, and a life reborn from all that was once thought lost. If stories like this speak to something in you, if they remind you of a time, a place, or a feeling you thought was long gone, consider subscribing to the channel. It's how we keep these old roads open and these stories alive. The wind bit through the timberline like an old dog stubborn with memory. It carried swept-up snow that slammed into the porch boards and howled through broken slats. Hana Kane stood there frozen by the frame of her closed doorway, hands encased in thick leather gloves, shotgun held lightly, but pointed firmly toward the lone rider who crested the hill. The winter of 1887 had come early harsh as a judge's verdict, and the land around Prospect Hollow was already buried beneath a layer of ice and cold. Hana's eyes, gray sharp and hollow with loss, watched every movement of that rider, every dip of his horse's neck, every spurt of breath into the cold air. He looked small and pale, hunched from cold, but there was something unspoken behind the quiet shape of his shoulders. He slowed, raised a tentative hand in greeting that barely stirred his bridle. The horse's hooves crunched wheels of time, turning with soft thuds in the wind. Hana said nothing. The snow fell in quiet proof that the world beyond this moment was frozen. But inside her heart, some small part refused to turn hard. At last he nodded and called, voice low and rough, "I'm John McCrae. Looking for work. Saw your smoke." Hana's finger tightened. "Work." The word floated between them, sharp as ice. "I'll feed you, and you can do it. Break the ice stack. The wood, fix the fence back behind the barn." She drew in a breath. "But come spring, you plant a seed. That's the arrangement." He blinked, breath hissing in the cold like faint steam. "Your terms?" he asked. She stepped forward, boots cold on pine. "I'll provide a roof and warm work. In return, in spring, you leave me an heir. No strings, no foolish notions, just a seed deep and steady." He stiffened, jaw moving behind frozen whiskers. The wind pressed against him, begging an answer. He looked away, red-nosed, frozen by confusion and something deeper. He turned, preparing to leave. But something halted him. Behind them, the barns and the house were carved into the hillside like a promise. And between those battered boards in the flickering lantern light, John thought he saw a wooden crate stamped with a name, Crow Ranch. His pulse stuttered. That name, a past he had tried to bury, rose in his chest. He looked back at Hana, whose stance did not waver, who held that single phrase like a lifeline. No love, just seed. He cleared his throat. "Crow Ranch," he said, voice even but distant. The words felt like a verdict, delivered after a long sentence. She didn't look away. She said softly, "My land's in jeopardy. The lawyers say I can't hold it without an heir. I've tried before." His throat tightened. The buzz of the wind lulled as if listening. He swallowed. Then he glanced behind him. The fallen gate, the torn fence posts, the snow piled half a foot deep against the barn wall. The work, steady, cold, endless, was something familiar. She must have seen the flicker in his eyes, for she said this next part without softening. "I've lost more than I can bear, more than any person should. And the doctors, they warned me this is my last winter to bear a child, or the homestead law will kick me out. I will lose it all." Each word was slow, heavy with winter grief. She raised the shotgun a fraction, not as threat, but as anchor to conviction. "So if I'm to stay, I need someone not for love, just purpose. He stared at her breath, shuddering like the last ember in a dying fire. The wind picked back up and howled again. But for a moment it felt like the world had stopped listening to hope born of desperation. He blinked, and a white flake fell onto his sleeve. He rubbed it off, remembered how snow looked in Kansas, how she smiled once. Before everything went wrong, he met her eyes again. Something fragile stirred the echo of his own heartbreak, of what he'd left behind in a quiet Kansas town before it all went bitter. The sudden memory of a trembling woman's hand in his, then gone. Hana watched close, her breath fogging the air, waiting. He exhaled harshly and nodded once. "All right," he said, voice rough. "I'll stay for the winter." She nodded. A subtle shift smoke drifted out of the chimney, a thin promise of warmth. She turned and stepped back inside, leaving the door cracked. "Then come in," she said. "Hell's outside." He dropped the reins clumsily, felt the snow shift under his boots as he crossed the threshold. The lantern light flickered, casting shadows that shivered on the face of the kitchen wall. He smelled coffee, bitter, strong, and necessary. Hana watched him enter, shut the door behind him firmly. The wind slammed into the wood, as if begging entry. But inside, they stood in silence, a widow and a drifter, each carrying grief, each carrying expectation. And the air between them held both promise and burden, a bargain struck on ice and need. Above them, the roof sank with the weight of snow, and the world outside, numbered seconds by frozen flakes. But inside, the ember of new life had just been lit, one they both dared not hope to kindle, yet neither had the strength to deny. By the second morning, the snow had hardened into a crust of white silence. It cracked under John McCrae's boots as he carried chopped wood to the back porch. He moved deliberately, always slow, always steady, as though every movement needed to be considered first. His hat was pulled low, his face red from wind, but his hands, scarred and brown, never hesitated. Hana watched from inside, steam rising from the coffee pot, like a ghost rising slow. She'd expected reluctance, maybe sloppiness. What she got instead was a man who didn't speak unless spoken to, who worked like the ground owed him something, and he meant to collect. John said nothing when she set his coffee mug down across the table from her. She didn't sit close, didn't smile, just poured and passed it over like they were two travelers huddled near the same fire, each nursing their own history. "Fence'll need reinforcing before next snow," he said finally, voice rough from morning chill. Hana nodded. "Use what's left of the hickory posts behind the tool shed. The rest we'll mill after thaw. No thank you, no praise, just business." That was how she wanted it. Still, that morning turned into 2, then 3, and a rhythm formed, quiet but real. Coffee at dawn, chores till noon, silence in the evenings, except for the crackle of wood or the occasional sound of her writing in her ledger. He noticed she never touched spirits. Her late husband's empty whiskey jug still sat on the shelf like a relic, but she never gave it a glance. She slept upstairs. He slept in the room off the kitchen near the stove. Once she caught him staring out the window during supper. He wasn't looking at anything in particular, just out into the dark like it held something he'd lost. She cleared her throat. "You get restless, McCrae." He shook his head, just listening. To what? He didn't answer. But she understood. Sometimes the wind had a way of speaking to men who'd ridden too long. On the 6th day, Crow came. The sound of hooves on ice reached John first. He looked up from the gate he was repairing and saw 3 horses cutting through the snow, Jedediah Crow front and center, with his wide-brimmed hat and black duster flapping like a crow's wings. 2 men rode behind him, both armed, though not obviously. Hana stepped out onto the porch before they could knock. She didn't call John, didn't need to. Crow dismounted with the grace of a man used to owning everything he stepped on. His smile was slow and thick with poison. "Still holding out alone, Hana?" he said, glancing past her toward the barn. "Or has the cold made you rethink my offer?" "I'd rather freeze than marry you, Jedediah," she said plainly. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Crow chuckled. "You wound me, sweetheart. I only ever wanted to help you." John stood silent in the background, tool still in his hand. Crow looked his way, eyes narrowing. "You the new hired hand?" he asked. "Just passing through," John replied, eyes unreadable. "That's the trouble with drifters," Crow muttered, returning his gaze to Hana. "They never stay." "But I do." "You stay because nobody else wants you," Hana said, turning to go back inside. "If you're here to posture, go do it somewhere else." Crow's smile dropped, and something colder took its place. He stepped closer to the porch. "This land is still in dispute, Hana. You know that. And if the state decides you can't hold it without bloodline," she met his gaze flatly, "then I'll find one. Soon." He stared a moment longer, then gave a low chuckle and tipped his hat. "You always were a stubborn thing," he said. "But time doesn't wait on stubborn women." With that, he turned and mounted his horse. The others followed without a word. Hana watched them ride away until their outlines disappeared beyond the tree line. John waited until the air settled before speaking. "You don't scare easy," he said. "Neither should you," she replied. That evening, Miriam stopped by. She came with salt honey and a sack of oats wrapped tight against the cold. Her cheeks were windburned, her eyes sharp and knowing. "You feeding him well?" she asked Hana, nodding toward the door where John's footsteps echoed faintly from the barn. "He eats enough," Hana said. "Works enough, too." Miriam looked around the kitchen, spotted the second cup drying near the sink, said nothing. Instead, her attention was caught by something through the frosted window. Outside, a young boy rode past on a brown mule, heading down the path toward the Crow Ranch. Thin but wiry, hair too light to belong to Jedediah. Miriam's breath caught in her throat. "That boy," she murmured. Hana raised an eyebrow. "Willis, one of Crow's, lives over there." Miriam stepped closer to the window, watching the child disappear around the bend. "Not Crow's," she said softly. "Not by blood." Hana turned slowly. "What do you mean?" Miriam didn't answer. "Not yet." Her hands trembled as she adjusted her shawl, mind spinning. She'd helped deliver that child 13 years ago. The woman, poor thing, hadn't made it through the night. Crow had shown up the next morning, took the baby without a word to anyone, said the mother died with no name, no claim. Miriam had kept quiet all these years, fear maybe, or shame. But now, seeing that boy ride past his features, so painfully familiar, her silence began to ache in her throat, like a wound that never closed. She looked at Hana, then back out at the darkening skeet. "Just be careful who you let in," she said finally, voice taut. "Some ghosts wear new names." The snow had softened under the sun's rare mercy, though the air still bit at the edges of morning. Inside the bar, dust floated like ash in the slanted light, and the horses shifted in their stalls, tails flicking at nothing. John stood near the back, oiling the hinges of the tack trunk. His fingers worked with precision, quick and firm. It was easier to fix things with his hands than with words always had been. He knew how to bind a broken fence, calm a spooked colt, but not how to handle what stirred inside him. When Hana brushed past him in the narrow hallway last night, her scent like cedar smoke and worn cotton, she hadn't spoken. Neither had he. But the house had gone quiet after supper, and the wind had eased its crying. They'd found each other not in desperation, but something quieter, recognition maybe. A mutual understanding that they were not built for romance, only truth. It wasn't clumsy or wild, their coming together. It was slow, almost reverent. She didn't ask him to stay after. He didn't offer. But in the flicker of lamplight, their shadows had overlapped on the far wall, like two halves of something long buried. The next morning, John rode out early. The fence line needed walking, and his head needed clearing. But the ghosts he thought he'd buried stirred with each hoofbeat. He remembered Kansas and the woman with cornflower eyes. Her laugh like rain. She'd disappeared after he left town too long, trying to outrun something he didn't understand then. He came back to find her gone. They said she died sick. No burial, no name left behind. He'd carried that weight ever since. He hadn't known she was with child. Back then he'd been too young to know how to stay. Now, he was too tired to keep running. Miriam walked slowly through the center of town, her shawl tight around her shoulders. She'd meant only to drop off herbs at the chapel, but something tugged at her, a whisper of memory she hadn't yet allowed herself to speak aloud. Then she saw him. Willis. He was brushing down one of the Crow mares with long practiced strokes, his sleeves rolled up past narrow elbows. His face, there was something about it. The slant of the cheekbones, the way his brow furrowed when he concentrated. It wasn't just familiarity. It was memory. Blood memory. Miriam stood still, her heart suddenly heavy. It had been 13 years, but she remembered the day, like winter remembers the first frost. A girl barely more than 16 arrived at her door, near dead from fever and hunger. She never gave a last name, just said the baby's father had ridden away, not by choice. She delivered the child, then bled out on the bed Miriam still couldn't sleep in, without hearing her cries. The next morning, Jedediah Crow showed up, coat dusted in frost face, already set to cold stone. He said the child was of his concern now, and took the baby before the sun even rose. Miriam had asked no questions. At the time she'd convinced herself it was mercy. Now it felt like betrayal. And now here stood the boy, half-grown, whip-smart, and cursed to bear a name that didn't belong to him. That night, back at Hana's homestead, John sat on the front steps with a mug of coffee gone cold. The stars were clean and sharp overhead. He didn't look up. He stared instead at the dark fields stretching out like a blanket, stitched with regret. Hana stepped outside, her coat pulled tight. She didn't sit, only leaned against the rail, watching the same empty place. "Heard you moving around last night," she said after a moment. "So did I." She let the silence breathe between them. "No expectations, John. I know. You've got ghosts." He didn't answer. Instead, he took a slow sip, winced at the cold bite of the drink, and set the mug down. "There was a girl," he said, "back in Kansas. Thought I'd marry her someday, but I left chasing a job. When I came back, she was gone. No one told me she'd died. No one told me she had carried anything of mine." He looked at her then. "Guess I've been writing from that ever since." Hana didn't speak. She looked at him, like one might look at a fire starting to catch, uncertain if it would warm or burn. "Funny thing about land," she said finally. "It don't care who planted the seed. It just remembers who stayed to tend it." Later, when John had turned in, Miriam arrived with her lantern low and her face pale. "I need to speak with you," she told Hana, voice taut. In the kitchen, the oil lamp cast her face in shadow. "I saw him again," she said. "Willis." Hana blinked. "Crow's boy," Miriam shook her head. "He's not a crow. He never was." The story came slowly, painfully. The fevered girl, the childbirth, the sudden death, the baby with no father to claim him, and Crow stepping in with cold hands and colder plans. "I didn't know the father," Miriam said. "Didn't ask. But I remember that child. And now I see him again. And," she paused, "he looks like John." Hana stood very still. "Are you sure I've delivered enough children to know blood when I see it?" Miriam said. That boy is his. Silence filled the room thick as snowfall. Hana turned to the window, where snowflakes drifted past the pane like tiny ghosts. And she whispered, as if afraid of her own voice, "Then John's not just a man running from the past. He's a father who never knew." The snow came heavy that morning, wet and fast. It blanketed the fields in thick white silence, muting sound and muffling motion. Hana sat at the kitchen table, her hand resting unconsciously against her belly, where something unseen had just begun. The doctor hadn't confirmed it, but she knew. She knew in that deep, wordless way women know when something begins growing beneath them, quiet, insistent, ancient. John had gone out early, checking fence posts after the windstorm the night before. He'd left without breakfast, just a nod, and Hana hadn't asked questions. That was the rhythm of them now, wordless understanding wrapped in winter silence. The knock came just after noon. Not a knock, really, more a pounding. She opened the door to find Jedediah Crow standing there, snow on his shoulders and something darker in his eyes. "I hear congratulations are in order," he said. Hana didn't move. "Get off my porch. You've been busy this winter," he continued, stepping forward, hat in hand. "And I'm guessing it ain't just the fences getting mended." Her jaw clenched. "You don't know a damn thing," Crow smiled, slow and smug. "Don't need to. Prospect Hollow talks. And when it does, I listen." Hana didn't respond. She turned to go back inside, but his next words stopped her cold. "You think the state's gonna let you keep this land, now that you're bedding down a wanted man?" he said. She froze. "I got names records. He's got ghosts trailing him like a bad smell," Crow continued. "They say he left a woman dead in Kansas. Rode off with blood still fresh." "He didn't," Hana said. Quiet, firm. "Doesn't matter if he did or didn't. What matters is I can make it look like he did. Sheriff Pike's still loyal to me. For now." Crow stepped closer, voice dropping. "You want to keep this land, you marry me. I'll make all this go away. The boy will have a name. You'll have protection. And your bastard won't be born into scandal." Hana's hand didn't tremble, but her voice dropped a degree colder than the snow around them. "I'd rather burn this land to the ground than give you 1 inch of it." Crow's jaw flexed, but he said nothing, just gave her a long, hard look, then turned and left. That night, the flames rose high. John smelled the smoke before he saw it. The scent was sharp and terrifying haywood, something deeper. He dropped the axe where he stood and sprinted toward the barn, heart already hammering. The fire clawed at the roof, golden tongues licking sky. The horses screamed, panicked. He threw the doors open and ran inside, smoke choking his lungs. One by one, he led them out, hands blistering from hot rope, eyes stinging. A timber collapsed behind him as he pulled the last mare clear. By the time the fire died, the barn was half gone, and John was coughing blood into the snow. Hana found him slumped against the fence, face blackened, one eye nearly swollen shut. She knelt, hands on his cheeks. "You damn fool," she whispered. "You should have let it burn." He shook his head, voice hoarse. "Not the horses." He looked up at her, eyes dark with something deeper. Was it Crow? She didn't answer. The next morning, Miriam came. She arrived wrapped in her thick winter cloak, eyes hard as flint. She didn't knock, just walked straight into the kitchen where John sat shirtless, bandaging his arm. "You look like hell," she said flatly. John didn't look up. "Been worse, I doubt it." She stood over him a moment, watching him struggle with the knot. "Let me," she said. He didn't resist. As she tied the cloth, her voice softened, but only slightly. "You know I kept quiet 13 years, thought it was none of my business. But now that boy's in the middle of a storm he didn't make, and I ain't staying quiet anymore." John stiffened. "Miriam met his guess. His name's Willis, lives with Crow." But he ain't Crow's. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small pouch. Inside, wrapped in old linen, was a braided silver locket, tarnished, but still intact. She gave me this, Miriam said. The girl, before she died, said to give it to the father if he ever came looking. John took the locket with trembling hands. It opened with a soft click. Inside, a lock of hair, pale and fine, like his. She died, he asked. His voice was hollow. She did. Bled out after the birth. Never said your name, just John and Wyatt County. That's how I knew it was you when I saw the boy. You got the same eyes. He looked away, jaw tight. I never knew, he whispered. Well, you do now, Miriam said, standing. You left one behind already. You gonna leave him again? She left without waiting for an answer. That night, John sat outside alone, fingers curled around the locket. The wind had calmed, but inside him everything raged. Hana came out after a while, coat drawn tight, boots crunching the snow. He yours, she asked. He nodded. And I don't know, he said. I never wanted to be a father. Hell, I never thought I could be anything worth staying for. You saved my horses, she said. He gave a dry laugh. Not the same. You didn't run when Crow came. You didn't run when the barn burned. She stepped closer. You don't need to be perfect, John. You just need to stop running. He looked up at her, eyes shining in the cold. I think it's too late. It's never too late to stay, she said. The morning broke gray, windless. Clouds hung low over Prospect Hollow, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. John McCrae saddled his horse in silence, his hands steady, despite the storm rising inside him. He'd said nothing over breakfast. He hadn't touched his coffee. Hana had watched him from across the table, arms folded, jaw locked. You don't have to do this alone, she said. His eyes flicked to hers. Yes, I do. She stood. Then I'm riding with you. He didn't argue. They rode in silence, the snow crunching beneath the hooves of their horses. The trees lining the road were still bare, their branches black against the winter skies. A flock of crows scattered ahead of them as they crested the final ridge. Crow Ranch sat below like a scar across the earth, wide, sprawling, fortified by fences and men. Jedediah Crow was already waiting by the barn when they rode in, a cigar burning between his fingers. He looked up, smiled like a wolf. Well, well. The bastard and the widow, he said, flicking ash to the ground. What brings the two of you to my doorstep? Need another barn burned? John dismounted, first boots crunching onto hard-packed snow. His voice was quiet, but it carried. I want the boy. Crow laughed. You want a lot of things, don't you, McCrae? Your name back, your honor, maybe even a family. But you don't get to walk in here and demand what's mine. He's not yours. Behind them, Hana remained on horseback, her eyes fixed like flint. Crow stepped closer. You come waving a locket and some dead woman's name, and I'm supposed to hand him over. Johnny didn't flinch. You stole him. I saved him, Crow spat. His mother was Dinezu, his father gone, no name, no claim. I gave that boy a home, work, a future. You gave him your name, not your blood, John said. They stood inches apart now, the cold air charged between them. Around them, hired men watched with twitchy hands, unsure whether to move or draw. John's fingers inched toward the revolver on his hip. Crow noticed, smirked. That what this is, a shootout? You really think killing me gets you what you want? No, John said. Then louder, he called out toward the barn. Willis silence. Then slow footsteps. A boy stepped around the corner, wiping his hands on a rag. His face was pale, eyes wide. Stay where you are, boy, Crow barked. But Willis didn't stop. He looked from John to Jedediah, conceit on his young face. What's going on? John took a breath. His voice softened. "You're my son, Willis." The boy blinked. "What, your mother was named Clara? I knew her in Kansas. I left too soon. I never knew she was with child." Willis looked to Crow. "Is it true?" Crow's jaw tensed. "You listen to me, boy. He's trying to twist your head. You belong here. I asked you once if I had real kin." Willis said, his voice shaking. "You said I didn't." Crow didn't respond. His silence was louder than any lie. "I trusted you," the boy whispered. Crow took a step forward, but John stepped between them, his hand still near his pistol. "Don't," John warned. At that moment, hooves approached fast. Sheriff Amos Pike rode in, rifle across his saddle. Behind him came Miriam, bundled tight, her eyes clear with purpose. They dismounted together, and Amos raised a hand. "Everybody calm," the sheriff said. "We ain't spilling blood today." Crow turned on him. "What are you doing here, Amos?" "I heard things," the sheriff said. "Things about a boy that might not be yours. Things about a fire. About blackmail." Miriam stepped forward. She handed the locket to Amos, then turned to face the crowd. "I delivered that boy," she said, 13 years ago to a woman named Clara in Wyatt County. She died in childbirth. Before she passed, she told me the father's name was John McCrae." She pointed to Willis. "That boy is his." Willis stood, frozen, eyes wide. Amos opened the locket. Inside, the hair still shimmered faintly under the light. "You stole him, Jedediah," Amos said, voice low. "Raised him as your pawn." "I gave him everything," Crow exploded. "A name, a roof, food in his belly. That's more than he ever would have gotten from a ghost." "You gave him a lie," John said. "I'm not asking for vengeance, just the truth." Crow looked around and saw too many eyes on him, too many hands near holsters, not on his payroll. He lowered his voice, bitter and hoarse. "I raised him. He's mine in every way that matters." Amos stepped between them. "He'll decide that." The sheriff turned to Willis. "Well, son, you want to go with this man?" The boy's lip trembled. "I don't know him." John crouched low, met his eyes. "You don't have to call me anything. Don't even have to come with me today. But I'm here now, and I'll stay. That's a promise." Willis looked between the men. Then slowly he stepped toward John. Crow didn't move. Amos nodded. "Then it's done." Miriam touched Hana's shoulder. Just as finally she whispered. Hana watched John place a hand on the boy's shoulder, her eyes damp but unblinking. Crow said nothing as they turned to leave. For the first time in his life, he looked small. The snow began to melt in early March. Not all at once, but just in patches. South-facing slopes turned brown before the rest, and the thin ice over the creek cracked and ran slick downriver. The air no longer bit as hard. It smelled different now, like wet soil and sap stirring under bark. Somewhere deep beneath the thaw, the land was waking. Hana Kane stood barefoot on the porch, one hand resting gently against the new curve of her belly. The child inside her was no longer a hope, or a maybe. It was real, moving beneath her ribs with stubborn little kicks that surprised her in mighty moments. The morning was cool but kind. She closed her eyes and breathed in the dampness, the mud, the wind that no longer howled but hummed softly through the branches. Behind her, the steady sound of hammer on wood rang out from the barn. John was building a cradle. He had started it the week after the standoff, when everything had finally begun to settle. The barn had been half rebuilt with the help of neighbors who, seeing Crow humbled, found their courage again. The sheriff came by less often, but when he did, he brought no threats, just tobacco news and sometimes biscuits from his wife. Willis had moved in quietly, the way boys that age often do. He didn't ask questions. He didn't call John Pa-you, but he didn't call Crow anything either. For a while he just did his chores, cleaned his boots outside, and ate at the far end of the table, Then one evening, as Hana handed him a second helping of stew, he'd muttered a thank you, and then soft as spring rain added, "Thanks, ma'am." Hana hadn't corrected him. 2 weeks later, after helping her fold laundry, he called out from the steps, "You need anything, Ma?" And that, she thought, was how healing happened, not with grand speeches or tearful confessions, but with small words spoken when the heart was finally ready. John carved slowly, methodically. The cradle was not fancy, but it was beautiful in its own way, oak and walnut smoothed and joined by his own 2 hands. Each groove, each corner was shaped with patience. It wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a promise. He didn't talk much about the future. He still startled sometimes when she reached for his hand in public. But he smiled more now. And every morning he made the coffee before she woke, then waited for her to join him. Once after supper, he caught Willis sitting in the doorway of the barn just watching him work. The boy didn't say anything, just yawed. John let him. Later that night, Willis left a small hand-carved horse on John's workbench. It was crude but careful. It said what the boy wasn't ready to. Spring crept in quietly. The days lengthened. The chickens laid more eggs. The garden, under Hana's patient tending, began to hint at green. One afternoon, John found her kneeling in the dirt, hands, dark with suckle hair, coming loose under her bonnet. He didn't say a word, just knelt beside her and helped her press seeds into rows. Beans, tomatoes, squash. He didn't know what any of them were. But she did. "This is how it starts," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "With care. With time." He looked at her and nodded. "I'll be here." Later that week, he sanded the final corner of the cradle, then carried it into the house. He set it near the fire where it would stay warm, the soft light catching on its grain. Hana ran her fingers along the edge. "It's beautiful." He shrugged. "It's just wood." "No," she said. "It's more than that. You built this with your hands. It'll hold the most important thing we've ever done." He looked at her, expression quiet. "I don't know what kind of father I'll be." She stepped close, resting her forehead against his. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to stay." And he had. Longer than he'd ever stayed anywhere. That night, as the stars emerged one by one, Hana led him out onto the porch. The sky stretched overhead, soft and endless. She took his hand and pressed it gently against her belly. The child moved, a fluttering kick just beneath his palm. "It's growing," she whispered. "Steady." He didn't speak right away. His hand stayed there, warm and still. He felt the life moving beneath her skin, a life they'd made, not from passion or accident, but from choice, hard and careful and stubborn. Finally, he said, voice low, rough, "So am I." She leaned into him, and they stood there beneath the stars, a woman once barren, a man, once rootless, and a boy inside, who had just begun calling them both home. The prairie stretched around them, wild and wide. But in that small piece of earth they had claimed with hands, heart, and hope, something had finally taken root. In the end, it wasn't blood or land or even love that bound them together. It was the quiet decision to stay when leaving might have been easier. John planted more than a seed that winter. He planted himself in soil, once barren, now full of life. And maybe that's all any of us are really looking for. Not a place to escape, but a place to grow. Slowly, steadily, together. This was a story of second chances, buried truths, and the kind of strength that doesn't shout, it endures. And if you're still listening, maybe some part of you believes in that too.